Good morning. Super happy to be here. I'm Prabin, CEO, founder of Mayten, a mobility technology company based in Brussels. I was also ex-CTO of Bond Mobility. Today's topic, as you see here, it's solving the pain points of shared micromobility. Uh, how many were here in 2019 when the conference happened at the same location? Okay. So if you remember what happened in 2019, we had scooters which were flimsy. I don't know if you guys remember the ES4 scooters from Segway. And we had Bird Zero, right, which lasted 28 days according to reports. And Joe was just saying that their scooters lasted about like 30 days. In Paris, we were losing about 8% of the fleet every month. Software wasn't great. We had a ton of challenges, right? But what we had in front was a lot of capital, some of the smartest minds working on solving challenges. And 4 years later, now when you look at where we are today, we should have solved most of the challenges, right? But apparently not. There's still challenges, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about, right? So with that, we'll have a quick round of introduction. Michael?
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Washinushi. I am the interim CEO for Bird Global. I've been in this role for now 10 weeks. Prior to that, I was the CFO for Bird Global. And then prior to that, I was the CFO for a technology company called FreshBooks, which was a SaaS-based company for cloud accounting.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sinah. I'm the head of expansion at Swobbee. We're a Berlin-based company building a network of battery swapping stations for all kinds of light electric vehicle batteries. We have about 90 stations live and actually just set up the first station in New York City. So the US is big on our roadmap, and it's great to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Goldman Getzler. I'm the head of marketing at Joyride. We're a global micromobility SaaS platform. We give operators all the tools that they need to launch and manage their fleets of shared mobility. And we're currently in over 200 global markets. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
So let's start with a common question. What's the biggest pain point today in shared micromobility? Maybe Wendy, can you start with that?
Sure, I'll be happy to kick it off. So our whole mandate is to help operators overcome the biggest pain points in micromobility. There are obviously, depending on the region or their fleet size, different things will impact their fleets. But overall, I'd say the largest pain point that we see currently is access to capital. So someone wants to have, the tools to get ready to launch their fleet. They are presented with barriers around capital. So we're trying to help them overcome that by providing the tools that they need. Financing is an option, or outsourcing their software to us so that they don't have the same overhead expenditure. We're a de facto software arm so that they don't have to spend out and shell out and have a whole operations team and software team in-house. They can outsource that to us. But capital in general is hard to come by these days, especially with a lot of industry consolidation happening. So I would say that that's the biggest barrier.
Cool. Sinah?
Yeah, from our perspective, two major challenges that we are seeing are, on the one hand side, the high cost of charging operations and a lack of safety measures on the other side. So today, right, you have hundreds of vans in cities that are driving in and out, transporting batteries to keep the fleet of electric vehicles running on our streets. So very long distances on the one hand side, and then inadequate safety standards in warehouses where batteries are being charged unmonitored, or companies have to employ people to stay there during the night to oversee charging. So we have a cost problem and a safety problem, and that's where we are trying to come in, offering our users a network of battery swapping stations that monitor all charging processes and allow them to just come by at central locations in cities, swap an entire battery cabinet out, and continue their journey.
Michael?
I'm going to approach it a little differently. I kind of look at pain points for our riders, because we're in the business of obviously trying to get with shared mobility as many riders riding our vehicles as much as possible. And so a pain point is rider friction for us. And what I mean by rider friction is it should be seamless and easy, and it should be always ready. A vehicle should be always ready for someone to actually use the ride. should be able to easy for them to pay for the ride and then end the ride. And one would think this is kind of table stakes for the business, and especially with this technology been around for a number of years. But there are some commonalities where it's like the vehicle is not correctly hooked up to the IoT, and it's offline, and you can't activate the vehicle. Or the payment options one has may not be one conducive to the particular country, or the app is not intuitive. And so all these sort of rider friction points is a pain point unique to every country. And for Bird, it's a pain point that we want to solve, because ultimately, if we make this easy for riders, then you should have more riders. So solve the rider pain point, we solve our own pain point as a business.
Thank you. Around 2019, when the conference happened, we did not see swappable battery scooters yet, right? If you all remember, Segway was introducing their Model Max, and Okai was just about coming up with a swappable battery, right? And this is a question that I really want to ask you for a very long time, someone from Bird. There were two paths taken. A bunch of scooter companies took the path of swappable batteries, but companies like Bird and Super Pedestrian doubled down on having like non-swappable battery scooters, right? I do see the merits of it. IP68 rating won't be possible without that. Larger battery that Bird 3 has won't be possible with swappable batteries. Thinking back, what was your learning from that? Was it a right decision for Bird? How do you see this evolving within Bird?
So it's a tough question to answer, but I'm going to look. It's almost like an outsider looking in, because I've been with this category for now close to 11 months. And, I believe that at the time the decision was made, it was the right decision in terms of waterproofing, in terms of the larger size battery, because you can get extended rides. And in fact, also making a vehicle that's, I'd like to say it's very smooth and because it's got a long deck, air tires in our B3, it was a very comfortable ride. And so at the time, from a rider point of view of extending the ride and having a comfortable ride, it was a great decision. I think when you balance in terms of operational complexities, and you want to be able to, get vehicles deployed as quickly as on the road as much as possible, you want cost efficiencies, this may have not been the right decision. I think swappables do help with getting vehicles deployed for a very long period of time, because you just swap out the batteries, obviously. So you get more ride time. It does help with operational efficiencies, because instead of having trucks pick up a B3 and transporting it back to the facility and charging it, it's just a swappable battery. So looking at it today, hindsight, I don't think it was the right decision.
Okay. Are you going to change something looking into the future, also linking to spin acquisition?
So, yes. So our most common version of vehicles, we call it B3. It's the silver one that's long. But the most recent generation we have, which is the Bird S and the Bird S Plus, is a swappable product. So you can tell we're directionally going towards swappables. And our acquisition of Spin, one of the key reasons we wanted to acquire Spin was the fact that predominantly, actually, I think all their fleet is swappable, and they have the in-house operations that we can also leverage as well. So yes, it was part of the thesis of acquiring Spin.
Okay. Sinah, your company is focused on operators that use swappable batteries. My question to you is, what are the challenges today in using swappable batteries, and how are you solving them?
So starting off, indeed, as a company, I cannot say that I would have anything negative to say about swappable batteries. But of course, there are some challenges related to that, which depend very much on the city, as we've learned. So theft is obviously a big one that companies using swappable batteries are struggling with. And I think the latest generations of scooters have improved a lot with locks, and it's made it much more difficult to steal batteries. But that's, of course, a risk for our users who have swappable batteries. Other than that, as we are dealing with a population of 8 different battery types that we currently serve, we see that, like any battery, they're not always behaving as, maybe the manufacturer said. So there are some anomalies that you'll always detect, and they are more prone to, being fallen down. So they're being treated a bit more roughly, I think, because they're swappable.
Okay. Wendy, you are in the business of offering software, and more than all of us, I think you are much more closer to many operators, right? And you probably have like data from across the world, right? From your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that the companies that you're working with are facing today, and how is Joyride helping them to solve them?
You mean in terms of profitability?
No, in general challenges that they have.
Yeah, I think obviously there's on the ground operation challenges such as swappable batteries, being able to access the vehicles. Industry consolidation is a big challenge as companies continue to buy each other up. Where does that leave opportunities for the smaller players? But we actually find that there are plenty of opportunities for them as consolidation continues to happen. So in smaller towns where there's currently not micromobility being offered, there's not share fleets in these smaller mid-sized markets outside of the main city centers, we're seeing more and more trying to get in and infiltrate those markets because there's still demand there, whether or not there's actual shared networks in place. Overall, obviously, there's the day-to-day barriers that we're trying to eliminate through things like our operator app, which help fleet managers, scan multiple vehicles all at one time, or communicate with the people on the ground in one shot rather than having to, go manually go out through rebalancing. So overall, the main barriers obviously are safety, as Sinah mentioned. So vandalism with vehicles, how to get that onboarding process as seamless as possible so that, the friction getting on renting is, the last thing that riders have to worry about. And yeah, I'd say overall this.
Just for the audience and for me to have some context, how big is Joyride? How many operators that do you work with? How many markets?
So we're in 200 global markets, and the customers on our platform run the gamut from 50 vehicles over to multiple thousands of vehicles. So it's not a one size fits all model, which gives us a huge perspective on what's happening in the industry. We're in tiny markets through to huge cities, but we're in 200 markets.
Okay. And Sinah, a question that I have for you is the business model that you're working on or offering for people that have been following the industry. A couple of years ago, Tier raised about 250 million from SoftBank and others, purely pushing a model similar to this, right? So having charging stations or battery swapping stations across the city, right? But something went wrong. I mean, we don't see them a lot. I mean, I walked around Berlin. I didn't see them at all. What went wrong there? What did Tier, where did Tier go wrong with that model?
Yeah, really good question. I think here, again, it comes back to sometimes having a great product technology-wise is not enough if you don't have the users who are going to adopt it. And this is exactly what happened there. It's a really nice product. I've seen the stations myself, super intuitive to use. But Tier tried to kind of offset that cost of swapping batteries to the user. And I think they just, found out that a typical Tier or a Bird user wants to use a vehicle like a kick scooter for convenience to get as fast as possible from A to B. And it's not enough for them to get some free minutes in exchange for doing a battery swap. So user swapping indeed is something that we see isn't really taking off. I know there are experiments going on at the moment, and we are doing user swapping ourselves for delivery riders who just come by and swap a battery. But that's a very different kind of user who wants to do as many deliveries as possible during their shift versus someone who wants to get to work very fast. So I think that was an assumption, a very good learning they had in that process. Yeah.
Okay. Michael, I've been, as you know, I've been following Bird for a very long time. From a cost perspective, you've been making progress, right? And specifically from a profitability point of view, where are operators going wrong? If you look at voice financials of 2022, wasn't great, but we just heard Joe talking about Line being profitable, right? But like I said, I do see that costs are coming down. But in general, what do you think should change in the industry for us to get to profitability?
So since I started with Bird, one of the efforts that we've been doing is focusing on costs and achieving or working towards achieving profitability. And I think one of the things that we're maniacally focused on is not, and a key element is everyone can just look at it, EBITDA or is just EBITDA, which is a non-GAAP feature for profitability. That is a good start in terms of getting to a positive. But the other element that we're targeting for us in terms of profitability is ultimately free cash flow. This business is a capital-intensive business. It's an operational-intensive business. And so your focus is in terms of managing CapEx and OpEx has got to be maniacal, starting with pricing the vehicle, pricing the services correctly so that, you can have a healthy gross margin and making sure that you manage all the various line items in that COGS, whether it's, IoT costs or credit card costs or labor services for placing the vehicle. So tactically managing that on a regular basis to optimize COGS is one area that we're focusing on. And I think that's where many businesses tend not to take a look at in terms of where can I go in terms of overall gross margin over time and what do I need to get there? So that's point one for us. Second one, as you layer in OpEx, is what's the right level of OpEx that I need to manage not only the top line, but also to manage potential future growth. This business is a regulated business. We have efforts in terms of government programs to not only maintain our ability to operate in some cities, but also to be able to grow. And so your OpEx level is a healthy tension in terms of balancing profitability, but also making sure that you don't haircut too much so that you don't compromise future growth for the future years. And then finally, managing CapEx, because that influences your free cash flow. That's part of it. It's like people can make an assumption, it's like a one and done. I buy the vehicles, but there is a operational component of the longer you extend the life of the vehicle, then the more you're actually able to reduce your overall CapEx and increase your free cash flow. And so I think operators sometimes look at one of three or maybe two or three, but you need to work all three together and have a cohesive plan to see how I'm going to optimize free cash flow. Because free cash flow is essentially what's the cash in the bank in terms of change in cash in the bank. And the more you can actually obviously increase it, the more financeable your business can be, but also the more you can actually self-fund as a business.
I was watching the CEO of Void talking about their 2022 financials and how they're performing in 2023. And something that he mentioned is that in 2023, they cut their G&A by about 20 million. And yesterday, one of the largest investors, VNV Global, during their quarterly filings, they mentioned saying that Voy is now EBITDA positive, I think about 19% EBITDA margin in Q3, and an undisclosed percentage EBIT margin as well, a positive EBIT margin, right? And also looking at Bird, if you look at the previous quarters, something that was interesting is that G&A was much higher than even the revenue, right? It's improving the last 2 quarters, but the quarters before that, G&A was much higher than the revenue. Do you see scope in cutting G&A? Is this something that you're looking at? It's for Michael, yeah.
Sorry, okay. So question is obviously, do we see G&A as an opportunity to reduce costs? Yes. I mean, I think it's not just in terms of G&A is comprised of, obviously there's an element in our G&A costs that we have to have as a public company. And so that's something that we cannot reduce. But there are elements of this that we can be, I'd say, smarter and faster, whether we can do the same functions within G&A with less people. I think we're looking at this. And the other thing that we're also looking at is, and I just noticed with Bird, and I also noticed with the prior technology company I had, I mean, we like to use best practices, best software, tier one software, tier one applications, and have a plentiful amount of licenses for all the users. And, being mindful about what's really needed to run the business instead of what's nice to have to run to the business has been one of our focus areas in terms of cutting costs. Because the question I will ask is, yes, it's nice to have, I'll use an example of like multiple Salesforce licenses for a CRM. It's nice to get the number one CRM in the country to support your business, but do we really need to have that? Can we go with something more cost efficient? And those are the questions that we're constantly asking internally to ultimately reduce the G&A costs. And the unfortunate part is those things take time. You generally have multi-year contracts or one-year contracts. So we're going to see slowly, gradually, reduction in some headcount, G&A through headcount, but also a reduction in third-party costs through just being smarter about the costs we use. And this goes back to, for me, what I said earlier is like, we're just going to look at our processes. Do we really need the processes? Do we need the level of people that we have supporting those processes, and or is it the right software to support those processes? And I think the answer is we're spending a little too much, and we can reduce it.
Got it. Wendy, on the same topic, you mentioned that Joyride actually advises operators that are on the platform, right? Kind of guide them towards better practices. Can you tell us what percentage of your operators are today profitable? What are they doing right? And for the rest, what advice are you giving them to get to profitability?
Yeah, so obviously we're privy to a lot of data coming in through our operators. Like I mentioned, there's hundreds on our platform. While we can't see who's actually profitable, we don't have insight into their actual day-to-day operations. We can definitely see the revenue that's coming in. And a large percentage of our operators are in fact profitable, usually in terms of unit economics and breaking even. Around 3 months or so is when they will usually offset their upfront costs and break even. And from there, a number of our operators do become profitable after that point. What's helping them become profitable? Well, first, they're lean. Number of our operators have very, very streamlined operations, so they don't have a huge number of overhead. They're able to operate with, a few fleet managers on the ground. They obviously are turning to our software to help streamline those operations. So something like as I mentioned, our operator app will essentially replace the number of overhead that they might have to have. They're using our CRM on the back end to set things like their operational hours or to reach out to their customers just completely through automated tools. So lean operations, having the actual support staff of our network behind them who are literally around the clock able to answer questions, to help them troubleshoot issues, to assist with things like an online learning academy like we have with Joyride Academy. So we have ongoing tools to help them, learn the best practices for their fleet so that they don't have to consistently, join for third parties. What's also helping them become profitable is tools that are embedded in the software itself. So for instance, we have an operator in the Philippines who has an additional 30% of income coming in just through in-app advertising through her app. So the rider app that she uses, that her users use to tap and rent vehicles, actually she sells advertising space through that app with local partnerships, and that is in turn is boosting revenue by another 30%. So not only are they lean, but they're also quite innovative in how to use the tools in front of them, and for that reason, we're seeing a number of them be profitable in the space.
Got it. And Sinah, one of the key things why Swobbee exists today is to help operators reduce their ops cost, right? Can you give us a breakdown of how that plays out? For example, say that it's 10 units of cost that operators would incur swapping batteries. Using Swobbee, how does that improve? Can you give us some insights there?
Yeah. Starting off, maybe just to quantify that cost, because we're all saying very high operational costs, but does that actually mean if you look at the ride revenue? So we now know through the past 2 to 3 years that from the ride of one scooter, right, that revenue, about 30 to 40% of that revenue is used to cover the cost of charging operations, which includes, of course, charging of the batteries, but also moving the vehicles around and redeploying them. But what we've learned over the past few years together with our users is we are helping them on 3 parameters to reduce that cost. The first one is by having this network that we open up for them, they can shorten distances to swap batteries. So that means they don't have to drive back to the warehouse, which is usually outside of town, and they can do more swaps per hour. And in some cases, especially in smaller cities and towns, they may be able to get rid of their warehouse altogether, so they don't have that additional lease contract. So that's factor one. Factor two is through our dashboard and software solution, we give them 100% traceability of their charging operations. So every swap is being registered. You can see exactly how empty your batteries are coming in, how long this takes. And especially for battery loss, this is something where they see, okay, this is an added value. We have a better visibility of where our batteries are and how healthy they are. And the final parameter is on safety and on battery lifetime or longevity. So through things like smart charging and ambient charging, we can actually increase battery lifetime by up to 10%. And for all the costs together, what we have seen is that we can reduce that cost of charging operations by 20%.
Okay.
Which is quite a big chunk of those 40% of the
Absolutely.
revenue.
And specifically for Swobbee, for the model to work, you have to have like hundreds of such stations across the city, right? And it has to make sense for you as well, right? At what scale does it make sense for Swobbee as a business to exist in a certain city?
So for us, we tend to be in the large cities, simply because there we have larger fleets and enough batteries with a high demand for uptime. That's the first place for us to start naturally with our customers. But more and more, we also see that satellite cities are actually interesting. Operators see there is a constant ridership base and they want to serve that ridership base, but maybe they don't want to have a whole warehouse there. So we're also going to those smaller towns with our customers. But of course, I can't deny that there's a cost with setting up this infrastructure, and we are working together with public and private location partners to make sure we get the best locations and we get energy contracts that allow us to charge when it's cheaper, for example, so that we can offer the solution for an affordable price.
Okay. Another important topic that I want to talk about is unit economics. It's in 2019, if you remember, Travis, the founder of Bird, put out a tweet thread. I think it was very popular then. Most of the folks that are following micromobility would know it. He put out a slide with a breakdown of actual costs, saying that Bird is making about 30% net profit every ride. How did that evolve over the years now? Do you see some parameters changing in the model? What has changed? Is Bird still making 30% margin per ride?
So, yeah, I looked at that, and I'm really glad and surprised to see that, Travis even just focused on unit economics. I think in any technology category, especially this particular one, unit economics is really important. You need to understand on every unit that you sell, are you going to be not only profitable, but can you actually cover off the sort of acquisition or capital costs that you did to make that ride possible? And so I'm going off memory, but like in 2019, the average net transaction was about $4-ish, and the gross margin, and I'm going to add back depreciation because I think of cash gross margin, was about 50%, give or take a few percentage points. Surprisingly enough, if you look at our Bird financial statements, it's not much different 4 years later. The average check is a little higher, significantly higher than $4, but the gross margin is about that 50% mark that you see right now. Now, the composition, when I looked at this, has changed a little bit. I mean, I think a lot of I don't think Travis called it out specifically, but as people know, or individuals know, Bird is a bit of a hybrid FM model and now in-house model with our acquisition of Spin. And so the labor costs associated with supporting an in-house market is not directly implied in, I guess, the model that Travis had, nor is the sort of revenue share that you would have associated with a fleet model is inherently in that unit economics. The rest of it in terms of AWS servers, credit cards, and everything are all implicitly. So I think that's the biggest change, is kind of like that cost of placing the vehicles and repairing the vehicles is not directly implied in the COGS, and I think that's what we're seeing right now. And that's the thing that that's an element that we're obviously spending a time on, making sure it's the right level, because you don't want to cut it too much because you impact revenue, but you also don't want to have too much because you're going to lose out on gross margin. That's what I see in terms of the biggest differences. And then I think the last piece is, at the time, it was the Bird Zero, if I recall, like the first generation Bird, where the life is probably 12 to 18 months of a vehicle. Now the life is obviously substantially longer. We're buying beefier vehicles that last longer. And so the average life of a vehicle is probably closer to 3 years, potentially 4 years, if you really take care of it. And that's a big difference on unit economics today.
Got it. One element in the unit economics model that many don't talk about is the payment transaction costs. Just to give you an idea, I was looking at the the annual report of Bolt, the car sharing company, ride-hailing company that also has a lot of scooters in Europe. Almost 7% of the net revenue went to transaction costs, like paying to Stripe or Adyen, right? How do you see that within Bird? Because at some point, Bird also introduced something called Bird Pay, and I believe the idea behind that was try to get this transaction cost lower, right? Do you see that as a challenge, given the fact that in micromobility these transactions are smaller, right? So as a percentage, the amount of cash that you would pay to payment processors would be much higher, right? How do you see that within Bird?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of dynamics in terms of those transaction costs being so high. First one, absolutely, is when the average check size is that low, then what you do see is, obviously, there's a fixed component of the transaction size, and there's a interchange rate that's charged to the consumers. And so that it's not so much the interchange rate that makes it high, it's actually obviously that fixed transaction charge. And so the way we look at this is, we look at group rides or multiple rides or ride passes to get the average check higher, so that you can average down that fixed transaction. And so that is one tactic that we look at in terms of reducing it. The other reason that you see higher rates, and this is applied to interchange, and this one is harder, especially when you're a global company, is when someone visits a country and they use Stripe or a processor, and they're a foreign credit card, the rate is significantly higher. And so trying to figure out a way, or working with the banks and the interchange to find a way to offset some of those costs, is something we're ongoing. I'd say it's not solved yet, but lowering that interchange rate is also another focus. But then also other challenge is, some countries, you really need to have a local presence or a local bank to really take advantage of the lower interchange rates. And unfortunately, there's a cost of setting up country entities, country bank accounts, to be able to get that interchange rate lower. And that's just an exercise of, is there enough scale in that country for us to set up those fixed costs to take advantage of those interchange rates in the long term? And that's another balance that we're looking at. But clearly, it's 6% when you think of credit card interchange rates. It's closer to 2 to 3%. It's a high premium that all our category pays.
Absolutely. There's a question for Wendy. So Bird, the tweet thread of Travis, he put out this unit economics model. There's McKinsey who put out a unit economics model, and the third company, as far as I know, is Joyride, that has a page on your website talking about a unit economics model, right? Breaking down to a trip level. Can you give us some insights into how your operators, the companies that are on Joyride, doing in terms of unit economics? Is it very different from what you see from Bird's model, or what even like McKinsey put out?
Yes, so our operators experience a similar breakdown to what Bird outlined. They generally enjoy 30% profit margins, opposed to 50%. But tend to, like I mentioned, around the 3-month mark is when they will break even from the overhead of purchasing vehicles. Joyride actually has dovetailing from what you mentioned about that unit economics page, we do have a financing program that will help with the financing aspect to that, with even partnering with the operators to help them purchase the vehicles to offset that overhead. But generally around 3-month mark is when they'll start to become profitable and break even from the rides. Obviously, the longevity of vehicles has improved since 2019, which is actually when I joined Joyride. It's been astronomical to see the lifespan of the vehicles improve, which obviously then bodes well for the unit economics. But generally around 3-month mark is when they'll start to recover those costs.
Okay, got it. And also from a Joyride cost point of view, right? I believe if you have thousands of operators across the world, you probably can also reduce, the what you charge to operators, right? A question that I have for you, it's an observation that I had. I was looking at the financials of Wunder Mobility, one of your competitors, and I was surprised to learn that from 2020 and 2021, their revenue dropped from 8.9 million to 1.2 million, right? Which is a drastic drop. How do you see it? I mean, is Joyride growing so that, at some point, maybe what you charge per scooter would be much lower? How do you see that?
Yeah, so Joyride is ourselves. We're obviously growing every single day. We're, fielding leads from across the globe of people who are interested in launching their own scooter or bike share. And might I say other form factors, as you've noticed from our announcement yesterday, we're integrating with GEM vehicles and other low-speed vehicles. So we're obviously breaking out of the typical scooter mentality, e-bikes, cargo bikes. So it's hard to just fit us into one, peg hole of just with scooters. I know that's a main topic for today. But as we evolve, obviously the way that we charge on our platform will continue to evolve as well. Right now we are per vehicle per month. We don't take any revenue sharing like other companies do. But as we see other use cases, such as private mobility models, so on campuses or, in private businesses that have their own use cases, we'll continue to evolve and see how that breaks down. But right now, we're completely per vehicle per month.
Okay. A question for Michael, also linked to the acquisition of Spin. If you look at scooter hardware providers right now, it's just two, which is Okai and Segway, right? If you look at Segway's financials, at some point, Segway might also decide not to make scooters for sharing because it's a very small portion of their overall business, right? And then there's Okai, where I believe orders are down this year. Do you see that as a threat moving forward? I mean, two companies in the market providing these vehicles, and at some point them deciding to stop, making sharing vehicles.
I don't think so. I do think that with we call it Ninebot and Okai, I do think even with two, there is enough that is enough to actually supply this category. But there are other smaller vendors who do produce sharing vehicles that we can easily move the business to. And obviously, Bird actually used a company called Joybold to actually help manufacture our B3s, and they're still in the capability of producing vehicles. So if those two decided to exit, I am confident that there would be another manufacturer that can scale up pretty quickly. So I don't see that as an immediate threat for the business.
Got it. We are almost towards the end, and I want to end with one question for everyone. What's your vision for shared micromobility, say 5 years from now? We will start with Wendy.
Yes, so 5 years from now, that seems like a lifetime in this industry. Obviously, every month there's something new that evolves, but we really see a lot of potential in the private sector of like I mentioned before. So obviously there's huge growth and viability in the public sharing domain, but really we're seeing hotel fleet rentals, campuses, corporate institutions who want to have their own private fleets and very multimodal. So as I mentioned, not just scooters and bikes, but a lot of other form factors that you'll see to come out onto the picture. Shared microcars and other areas of mini mobility really going to take off. So we see that as the future. Obviously, there'll be continued consolidation in the industry. Only time will tell what will happen 5 years from now, but we really do think that leaves a lot of opportunities in the smaller mid-sized market. So I think that you'll see a lot more shared schemes through there. Also franchising as well. I think that there's a lot that you'll see with as this consolidation continues, that maybe there'll be these one singular brands with lots of other networks stemming off of them. So that's where we see the biggest opportunities.
Joe just remarked about Bird getting into franchising model, but that's for later. Sinah, what's your comment on it?
So what we hope is that through now really optimizing to the bone on all fronts, that more people will have access to shared mobility solutions, and that all in all, like, we'll need less vehicles from a sustainability perspective. Then looking just at the batteries, we'll hope that there is more standardization, which will make it much easier to repurpose and recycle all these batteries that we have in the field right now. And that's something that we're actively working on with several consortia. That's, I think, one road we need to go on. There will not be one battery, but there will be hopefully a couple that are made for recycling and dominating the market.
Okay. Oh, for Michael, it's a two-part question. One is, like, how do you see the industry in 5 years? What's your vision for the industry? And where do you see Bird in 5 years?
Okay, I got to be careful with some of this being a public company CEO in terms of guidance. So I'm gonna be very generic in terms of my viewpoint. But I would say, I'll just comment that we are in the early innings in this category. There are still a lot of cities that don't have a shared micromobility program in the city. So I think in 5 years, I see that, shared micromobility is in hopefully 80 to 90% of all major cities around the world. And I think that would be a good thing. I will also like to see, and maybe this is Michael being a little bit wishful thinking, is like there be regulatory frameworks in all the cities, and that regulatory framework is relatively consistent across all the cities. That way it makes it easier for operators like Bird or Lime or Voi to operate this and generate gross profits and be profitable. So I think that's kind of what I'd like to see 5 years from now, is this category at scale in all cities. It becomes just part of a household use for commuters within every city. And I'd like to see Bird to be part of that vision in 5 years.
Got it. I'm so bullish on micromobility, and I'm excited for the next 5 years, and I really want to see where this journey goes. But thank you so much, Wendy, Sinah, and Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you.